We are now in chapter 13 in the book called Path of the Just. I'm reading out of the Art Scrolls version. There are other different versions out there, so if as you're following us online, if you see that the text is a little different, don't panic. We'll get the same idea across. Chapter 13, Path of the Just. We're going to be dealing with the trait of parishus. Parishus is a word that's going to be described as abstinence, but it's really not a good word. Because when we think abstinence, what do we think right off the bat? In American culture, anyway. What's the first word? Sexual, no sex, right? This has nothing to do with that. Okay? So just get that out of your mind. Abstinence means choosing to abstain from something that is not necessarily wrong for the sake of obtaining a higher level of cleanliness and purity in your life, right? So, and we'll describe this. There's going to be a word that is used in this text, and in this lesson specifically. We have used it before, and I've explained it, but I will use it again. The word is chasidus. Chasidus meaning piety. When we think of one who is a chesed, what do we often think in a modern age is the guys that wear the strimmel, the fur hat, and have the long payos. We think those as chasedim, chasedut. They're the chasedut. But when the Ramchal wrote this down and used these words, he was not talking about a sect of Judaism. He's talking about an individual who exercises a level of piety that is not obligated upon themselves. They go another level. Many people who have become Noahide or Ger, at some level have chesidut. They become chesed because they take upon themselves different mitzvahs that are not obligated. And they know they're not obligated. But they feel serious about doing them because they feel drawn to that. So with that being said, we understand that this is the next step above nikius. Nikius was purity. So let me read this and so that we can kind of put it in order. One who has attained all the traits up to and including nikius has reached the level of a tzaddik, right? A righteous person who properly observes all the laws of Torah, for he has successfully trained himself or herself to pursue all mitzvahs with thoroughness, okay, through zerizus, which is watchfulness. So watchfulness is to avoid, is to not sin, right? Watchfulness is to avoid doing a sin. That's great, but then there's another level called zerius and nikius, which is to avoid even the traces of sin. So you practice zeal to do the mitzvahs. So zerizus says, I don't want to sin. Zahirus, I constantly have a trouble saying that. Zahirus and nikius is to run after the mitzvahs to do righteous things. One is to avoid sin, the other is to run after, have zeal to do righteous things. The Chesed, however, out of great love and awe of Hashem, seeks to serve Him even beyond this level. Just as becoming a Tzaddik requires a person to have followed the ascribed steps that Rav Pinchas ben Yair states, so too becoming a Chesed requires one to follow an additional succession of steps. And this is one of the steps. The trait of abstinence. Before defining the trait of abstinence, the Ramchal points out a fundamental shift that occurs at this point in the path of the just. In essence, the general subject of the Sefer, that of achieving perfect service of Hashem, can be divided into two distinct parts. The trait of parishus is the beginning of the practice of chesidus, of piety. So the trait of abstinence, or learning the trait of abstinence, is the first step to higher levels of piety in your life or righteousness. You should realize that everything which will be explained in this work until now is that what a person needs to become a tzaddik, or a righteous person. But from here on in the book, the focus is on the steps necessarily to become a righteous or pious person. You understand the difference between a righteous person and a pious person, right? So the righteous person does what the Torah requires them to do. A pious person goes above and beyond what is required of them to do. And it thus emerges that the trait of abstinence, or perishus, in relation to the trait of chesidus, or piety, is like the trait of zerhirus in relation to the trait of zerizus. So let me follow this. I know it's going to be confusing. So let me say it with some English words so people can understand. It thus emerges that the trait of abstinence is in relationship to piety in our life. That means I'm abstaining from things that are not necessarily sinful because I want to go to a higher level of righteousness. We're going to explain what that is in detail later on. Just as those two are related, so is watchfulness and zeal. Watchfulness to keep from failing to do the mitzvahs, failing to sin. Watchfulness to keep myself from sinning, as well as zeal and eagerness to do righteous things, right? Those things sort of marry together. For one's abstinence is like zeal involves avoiding evil and doing good, while the other, chesidus, is like the one who is watchful, is very watchful, very careful about his life. Involves actively accomplishing good. The Ramchal now turns to define this word, perishus, this way. How the essence of perishus is captured by what the sages of blessed memory says: sanctify yourself by refraining from that which is permitted to you. Indeed, this is the connotation of the world itself. Perishus literally means separation. Means separation. Calling yourself out to be separate. Meaning, in this context, to separate and distance oneself from something to which he would otherwise be connected to or near. That is, he prohibits for himself something that is halakhically permitted, with the intention being to thereby avoid encountering the forbidden act or object itself. So here's one on the very simplest level, what we're meaning. Meaning in this context, to separate and distance oneself from something to which he would otherwise be connected to or near. That is, he prohibits himself something that is halakhically permitted, with the intention of being to thereby avoid encountering the forbidden act or object itself. So here's an example. I went to avoid gluttony. So to avoid gluttony, I will forbid myself certain foods. Right? There's nothing wrong with eating cake and having a lot of sweets and eating bread and cheese and all those things. But knowing myself that I have a propensity that I could become a glutton and overeat. A glutton can be a glutton without being obese. You know that.
Correct.
Right? They overindulge. So to avoid that, I just don't indulge in certain things that trigger that in me. I just avoid it. Alcohol is not a sin. However, if one knows that by drinking alcohol, they have a better chance of committing a sin, they don't drink alcohol at all. Right? That's what we're talking about. And that is a level of piety that we're talking about. It's that one prohibits himself and then it becomes binding upon them at some level. They almost consider it a sin to them. It's to them, I can't do this, right? So that's what we're talking about. To further clarify this definition of parishus, the Ramchal explains the position of parishus within the context of all forbidden activities. Consider it, and you will see that there are three levels of action to be avoided. There are biblical prohibitions themselves. Number two, there are fences, right? We talk about building fences around Torah. We all understand what that means. And then there are fences which are decrees, safeguards that our sages of blessed memory have instituted that are found in oral Torah. Third, and there are distincting measures that are incumbent upon each and every parush or practicer of this abstinence to enact, to withdraw into his own dominion and build. Personal barriers. So you have biblical barriers, which we know are obvious. We have halakhic barriers that come, or what we call rabbinical halakhic barriers. Can you give me some, what is a biblical barrier? Give me one biblical barrier you can think of. Idolatry, that's very good. Idolatry is one. So what would be a rabbinical halakhic thing that you can think of that's not necessarily defined in the Torah itself?
You wouldn't go into a place where they worship.
That's one. That's good. You just wouldn't even go into a place, you just absolutely wouldn't even set your foot on the ground where another religion practices idolatry.
The mixing of meat and dairy.
Meat and dairy would be a biblical one, but then there is a rabbinical one that says we don't eat cheeseburgers. We don't add it to our chicken,
Exactly.
right?
It's a fact.
There's a biblical barrier that says don't light a fire on the Shabbos. There's a rabbinical barrier that says don't turn on electrical items. If they're on, leave them on. Don't turn them off, because that's not, so you understand, that's the difference. Now, with that being said, those are levels 1 and 2, which are incumbent upon everybody. But then the third one is the trait of abstinence. It says, this is what I'm going to do. You know, I'll avoid alcohol. I'll avoid eating certain things because it triggers my mind. I'll avoid certain television shows. Or I won't even watch TV at all, right? Or, you know, whatever. Yes.
I set that barrier for myself, a personal barrier, and then I break it. Does God count that as a sin against me?
I don't believe so, but we're going to have to see what the Ramchal says. I don't believe that's the case. But at the same time, it can affect you, because then you have to deal, and that's why you have to be careful about adding things onto yourself that are not forbidden. Why? Because why add more opportunity for you to be disappointed in how you serve Hashem? Why? There's just no point in it. And I think that the comment made last night that we said, that Loretta mentioned, that don't pray to, Rav, but I didn't hear him say it, you said it. Rav Dor Kasudo said, don't pray to be a Zadik. Don't do it. Because what you'll have to endure to do that could be more than you can bear.
Not
So,
for a high level.
right, so pray, I think it's good to try to obtain those levels and pray that Hashem gives you wisdom to do that, give you the ability to do righteous things, but there are just some things you should just do. Don't set yourself a goal too high that you can't attain.
To a war if I've never even shot a gun.
Right.
I mean, how dumb is that?
Right. Yeah, I want to be
Drop myself.
think about it. For example, that would be like me saying, I want to be, what do you call those cage fighters? What is that? MMA?
Oh, whatever.
They go and they just beat each other up.
In a minute.
Right. I want to be an MMA fighter. I mean, think about it. You guys all laugh because you realize impossible. No matter how much you train, you are not going to be a cage fighter. Right?
Yeah.
Right? So don't set that goal for myself, because I'll be disappointed. I'd probably have a cardiac arrest before I even get in the ring. Right?
Well, and it could be a slippery slope that as you
Absolutely.
start
Absolutely.
then you sort of say,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So this is what happens. You set yourself up to do things that are way beyond halakhic requirements. You fail to do that. Then you start thinking, well, then what's the use of doing any of it? That's how you feel. I mean, we all feel that. How many times have we felt that even with the things that we know are required of us? And you think, oh, it's just too much. Why even bother? Anyway, here we go. Here's additional objections. Furthermore, it is proper for each individual to, I'm sorry, we skipped a section here. Hold on. So this third category is what we call to withdraw into his own domain and begin to build his own personal barriers. That's the third one. Now, that is, he commits himself to forego some of the things that are permitted, which are not forbidden to all of Israel. Neither biblically nor rabbinical law requires them to do this, and to be separate himself from them nonetheless, so that he will remain very far from that which is bad, i.e. forbidden. Before elaborating upon the meaning and application of parishus, the Ramchal raises a number of challenges, both from rabbinic sources and from logical reasoning, to the idea that is appropriate to abstain from that which is halakhically permitted. Now, we might ask this question: from where do we know that we may continually add prohibitions upon ourselves beyond the set out of Torah? Do we not remember this phrase, "You should not add to nor take away from my Torah"? So here's the question: is that adding to Torah? Okay, and I agree with you, Val. Val shakes her head. No, why is it not adding to Torah? We're not saying that Hashem forbids me to do this. We're not saying that the Torah forbids me to do this. We're not saying that rabbinical halakha requires me to do this. You're saying, this is my own thing. I just don't want to do that.
And not applying it to somebody else.
Not applying to somebody else. Hashem didn't say that I had to forbid myself to go to movies or whatever it may be, or read certain magazines. I will refuse to do that. Why? Because I want to avoid the opportunity to do any type of sin. I'm putting this barrier on myself. It's not adding to Torah. However, if I begin to act and tell people that that is forbidden, you shouldn't do that, and that God wouldn't be happy with you doing that, in some way I'm becoming my own rabbinical authority, and that's not right. This is why our sages of blessed memory remarked disapprovingly regarding someone who had vowed to refrain from a certain food. It is not enough for you. It is not enough for you what the Torah prohibited. Meaning, so you think you're better than what the Torah prohibits? You're going to add more to it. So there's an accusation from the sages that there might be some spiritual haughtiness that is going on with this whole thing. The sages thus seems to discourage the making of optional restrictions. The Ramchal elaborates on this objection. Now, whatever our sages of blessed memory saw in their wisdom as necessary to prohibit and to establish as safeguards, they already did when they enacted decrees for the entire nation. And whatever they left permitted, that is because they considered it appropriate to be permitted and not forbidden. So why should we now establish new decrees upon ourselves that they did not see fit to enact? So what's the point? Why put these decrees upon yourself? But up front, we said why. Yes, ma'am.
We had a different culture than they lived in.
Correct.
I mean, so wouldn't there be different laws or offense laws to help protect us because we are facing new things?
Absolutely. But yeah, absolutely we are. For example, halakhically, there's really nothing being dealt with specifically about media, right?
Right.
However, we do know, we've been taught by the sages of blessed memory to guard our eyes, guard our gateways, right? What we hear, what we see. And so that can be applied to these. But in reality, it's not a sin to watch TV. It's not a sin to go to a movie. It's not a sin. But clearly there are people, because of their place, they just feel uncomfortable. and don't do it. Rabbi Abraham Greenbaum has that prohibition. He does not watch TV. He doesn't go to movies. That's his prohibition. He doesn't say it's wrong for other people to do it, right? But he does it because he's guarding his neshama.
It's levels different.
It's there. Absolutely, his levels different. Yeah, absolutely. So, an additional objection that the Ramchal brings up, he says, furthermore, if it is proper for each individual to add personal restriction upon himself, there is no logical limit to this matter. There's no limit to the permitting things from which a person who practices abstinence would have to abstain. And if so, it will emerge that a person who practices perishus will be basically tormented by the whole thing and not take any enjoyment from the world at all. But our sages of blessed memory reject the ascetic way of life, or this life, like what do you call it, monks, to be like a monk. Yeah. What do they call that? It's called, there's a word for it.
Hermits who just...
Yeah, there's a word for it. I just can't remember what's
it's
called.
not a hermit, though.
Yeah.
I know it's... Now you got us all doing it.
Acidic? Does that sound right? Acid. You understand what I'm saying? Like a monk.
Yes.
Well, back in Greece there was the...
Cloister, yeah. Yeah, cloister. They separate themselves from all of society. They have nothing to do with them. There are these Catholic monks that take this idea and they put upon themselves to not speak. They never speak. They only pray. Those are some of the things we're talking about.
There are some Rebbe's that have been in isolation as well.
Oh, absolutely. There's been some,
that's where they've learned with Hashem.
Well, think about the author of the Zohar that was in a cave for 13 years to write this. Yeah.
He was still young.
Yeah, exactly. The Ramchal replies to these objections by first citing a number of sources that clearly support the practice of perishus. So the Ramchal is in support of this idea. Yes, ma'am.
Before we move into that paragraph, I think there's the answer to my question.
Okay, what is it?
If I'm understanding
Go ahead.
this, it says, one would have to live in desolation and affliction, deriving no enjoyment whatever from the world, whereas our sages of blessed memory have said in, I don't know how to pronounce it, Yerushalayim Kedushin, that a man will have to give an accounting to the presence for everything that his eyes beheld and he did not wish to eat, though permitted able to do so.
Right.
So that sounds like if I set a fence and I break it, then I do have to account for that.
Well, you have to account for it, but you're going to have to account for as to why you did that. Not that you did or didn't do it, but why. For example, if Hashem gives us the fruit of the land, and we say, oh, I'll never eat fruit. I can't imagine you doing that, but for whatever you decide not to eat fruit, Hashem's going to go, I gave you fruit. I gave this to you. There are brachas, there are blessings that you have not said over fruit because you didn't eat fruit. Right? So there are blessings that you couldn't bless me with. You're going to be held accountable for that. So that's why that some of the sages say that is why one who abstains from the fruit will take and eat the first fruit of the harvest, one from each kind, and do a blessing to Hashem over it.
So again, the fence could keep you from good and bad. I mean,
correct. If you put up, if you abstain from things, you could also, in your abstaining from things that are keeping you from whatever sinning,
right.
You also could be abstaining from things that is an opportunity for you to serve Hashem in your blessings. To bless
Hashem. If you put me in a cave, I'm not going to be like the guy that wrote the Zohar. You know what I mean? It's like, go out in the world and better learn. Yeah, exactly. Well, I don't know. There are some times that I think the older you get, this would be easier. That if you got thrown in jail in solitary confinement, you'd go, no, that's fine. I would.
You get 3 hot meals and you can just study. You just study all day long.
Not when I was younger, but now.
Yeah.
But there's the thing. I know that in the laws of
like, you know, on the Bryant, which is crazy, you know, how they'll drag the cross or they'll flail themselves.
Right, right, right.
You know, it's some sort of, and it's actually probably an ego thing. Where
they're inducing pain on themselves.
Yeah.
They are. And I
Right.
think that some wholeheartedly do it with that intent. I mean,
In other religions.
yeah, in other religions.
But this, I believe that if a person is doing this, you know, abstaining, having, you know, developing this trait, they've got to make sure they're not doing it out of pride and ego.
That's what I
You know, they want to show everybody, because
That's what I'm
somehow,
getting from this.
yeah, we dealt with this before in the book where he says, you know, that's the most insidious level of haughtiness, is that when a person does it out of religious fervor, they're really demonstrating some pride that look how religious I am. And so I could see that a person who's abstaining from certain things, when he's in that environment with other people who don't, and they enjoy the blessings of Hashem, he goes, I don't do those things. Because they want them to go, oh, he's a holy man.
Yeah, you don't need
Right?
to really put it out there. You just say, no, thank you.
No, no, thank you. That's all right.
It's a fine line.
I don't
Yeah.
go to movies, you know, something like that.
Or when I go,
you like
people
a-
look at me like I'm crazy.
Yeah, but I got, yeah, yeah. So,
Red box every night.
yeah, exactly. Netflix. I don't go to movies.
Yeah. You got Netflix now. You don't even have to go out of your house.
It's like, no, I don't have cable because, you know, it's like a sin to me, but I have Netflix on my computer, so. That's almost the same thing, right?
Yeah,
Right.
it is.
Let's see, where are we at? So the Ramchal continues on. After demonstrating the appropriateness of this lifestyle of abstinence, he will proceed to resolve the above statement of the sages that seem to dictate otherwise. He's trying to not go against what the sages are saying. He's wanting to build, though, a place for a person to be able to do this if they need. The answer is that abstinence is certainly necessary and essential, and our sages of blessed memory exhorted us to regarding it. And Taurus Kohanim to Vayikra 19:2 states this, saying that this is what the verse refers to when it states, "You shall be holy." It means you shall be people who separate yourself from material desires. This is what he's talking about. It's separating yourself from material desires. Furthermore, the sages stated that anyone who voluntarily undergoes a fast is called holy. Can be demonstrated through Kal Vachomer, argument for the Netzir. The Netzir is a person who takes on a Nazirite vow, right? That's sort of like a Nazirite vow. The person who doesn't shave their beard or their hair, they don't drink wine, they don't eat grapes. Actually, I don't think any grape product, even if it's dried, they cannot eat it. So they're putting on themselves sort of, that's what the Ramchal is saying. It's sort of like being a Netzir, right? The argument runs as follows. If a Netzir who deprives himself only of wine is characterized as holy, then all the more is one considered holy if he fasts and deprives himself of all food. So what he's saying is, Hashem calls us to have certain fast days, right? Yom Kippur is one of those fast days. However, if you're an individual that feels like I need to fast, there's something I need to fix within me or rectify, there's nothing wrong with that. That is a level of holiness, and for sure you're not flailing yourself and you're not boasting about it. The sages continue on and say, a righteous person eats to satisfy his soul. This is a reference to someone like the king of Judah. They said of him that his servants would place only 2 bundles of vegetables and 1 litra of meat before him every day, and the people of Israel would mock his sparing consumption of food and say, this is a king? The application to the title of righteous to this individual is due to his practice, indicated the sages above. So the fact is that here he was the king of Judah, and he refused to overindulge. Just put enough on the table to get me by each day. Some people would say, well, he's a king. He should be, portly and enjoying his wine and food. And that's why he was that way. That is the time, this is brought up that at the time of his death, he raised up his 10 fingers heavenwardly and said to Hashem, it is revealed and known before you that I toiled with my 10 fingers with all my strength to study Torah, and I did not benefit from the pleasures of this world, even in proportion to the toil of my little finger. So he's saying, Hashem, you know that I spent my entire life attempting to study and grasp Torah. And even though I was permitted in the physical world to live like a king, I didn't even do that much of it. I lived as a student of your Torah. I wanted to be a student. I didn't take anything benefit for myself. The sages continue on to say, before a person prays, that words of Torah should enter his innards, he should pray that fine food and drink should not enter his innards. The Ramchal sums up the importance of these sources. Now, all these statements of the sages teach explicitly the need for parishus, the obligation to engage in it. However, at any rate, we still need to resolve the statements cited above that apparently indicate the opposite of this. The Ramchal recognizes the various sources. He says, I do agree that the sages warn us to not do these things, put extra binding things upon us that is not an obligation. However, the understanding of this subject is as follows. Certainly, there are many fundamental distinctions regarding this matter. That is, there is a kind of parishus that we are commanded to adopt, and there is another kind of parishus that we are warned against not to stumble into. So what is he saying? He's saying, certainly the sages have warned us to not practice this for certain purposes and reasons. However, it is applicable for a person and encouraged for a person to practice this for another reason. The other reason being for higher levels of holiness. That's what it's for. So, if that is the case, then we know that in the same way a person can practice charity out of pride, and that actually be a sin. A person can also practice charity out of love for their neighbor, which is a mitzvah. We can do the same thing with abstinence. We can say, I abstain from all these things because I'm putting on an air that I am living at a level of chassidut. But in reality, that's just a level of haughtiness and pride. And the sages say, why put this misery on yourself? Why do this? There's enough prohibitions already. Don't add something to yourself. However, there are individuals that say, I have to do this. I have to do this to myself. And I really do believe that the Noahide or the Ger really understands this probably better than many people, because they're told constantly, you're not obligated, don't do these things, don't do that, don't do Shabbos, don't do, it's telling you all the things you don't do. And at the same time, you feel this intense desire, zeal, and watchfulness to do these things. And so therefore you say, I'm going to do that. I know I'm not obligated to study Torah. I know I'm not obligated, but I'm going to do it. It's something that I have to do. This is what we're talking about. The Ramchal provides 4 examples how indulgence is permitted in permitted matters can bring one closer to sin, and how parishus in these areas can protect him from that eventually. By way of example, with regard to food and drink, when we are free of all prohibitions of dietary law, they are permitted for consumption. However, overly satisfying oneself can lead to casting off the yoke of heaven, and wine fast can lead to immoral relationships and other evil things. So, what is he saying? Food is permitted. but you overindulge could lead you to sin. Right? It's obvious. The above applies even to occasional indulgences. There is, however, another danger that arises when such indulgence becomes habit. Certainly, indulgence in food and drink is destructive when a person accustoms himself to satisfying himself with eating and drinking. For if he then misses his regular fare every once in a while, he will be pained and will feel the lack very strongly. And because of this need to constantly satisfy his craving, he will end up putting himself in the thick of business toil and exhaustive labor to accumulate wealth. Why does he want to focus on the material world? So that he can get him some more food, for crying out loud. I mean, this is a very simple level, but we can understand what we're talking about. You say, well, how does abstaining in this question, how can abstaining from food be beneficial to you? Well, if you know that you have the propensity to go overboard and that you realize that it would bury you in the physical world, then it would be good for you to fast occasionally. If you know that you overindulge in certain things and that once you start the habit of overindulging, you find yourself completely consumed in the material world because you've overindulged and you've lost the sake of heaven, the focus of heaven, then by all means, you should put these restrictions on you. That's the reason that Ramchal brings down as arguments for.
I've heard this phrase, some people eat to live.
And others live to eat. Absolutely. No, there are some people who live to eat. Trust me. We know those people. Not in here. Why is everybody looking at Moshe?
I haven't even looked that way. I don't do any exercise so I can get fat eating cracker.
That's actually, I think that's in chapter 19, fat from a cracker.
I can't. When you don't exercise, you get fat.
Yeah, this concludes this first half. This is going to be there's going to be a two-part lesson in this. And we're on page 276. We're dealing with the sort of examples that the Ramchal gives in indulgence and habits and why it would be appropriate for one to put a binding obligation on themselves not to overindulge in eating or drinking wine. And we'll continue on in that in the next chapter. Anybody else have a comment, fear, doubt, unbelief? Now would be the time to express that. Yeah, but it was 45 minutes. I have to keep an eye on the clock. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I try really hard to keep my lessons between...
People that